Well, we promised you double the chuck, and we deliver. So, John, we're going to play our favorite game.
Uh-oh. What do you got for me this time?
One of these people wants you to take a walk up an unsafe stairway in the middle of the woods, and the other one has a goblin in their house.
Wow. Okay. Um, wow, you're really testing my sensibilities here. I'm going to go with Wendig having the goblin and Caitlin Burns having the crazy staircase.
How do you do, guys?
Ooh. Burn.
Yeah.
Oh, well,
Well,
what
I'll
do
say
I
it's
know?
actually
What
5 goblins in my house right now.
And what kind of goblins are there? Are they furry goblins? Are they?
Yeah, they're Labrador mixes.
Wow.
Yeah, we have 2 weird mud goblins. So
Yeah. I got my first dog when I was in my late 30s. I'd always wanted a dog, but I'd never had the opportunity, really, living in New York apartments for an age, and parents who were allergic to things with furs. But once we had a dog, it was the first time I really got goblins as a mythical creature. I've spent a lot of time reading mythology and folklore, but I was like, huh, okay, cool. They're sort of like cave-ish things, a little bit scrappy. And then I met dogs, and I'm like, oh, this all makes sense. So, it definitely was a realization for me. And now just wait and see. One of them might just jump on me in the course of this call because having dogs so late, I'm not the best dog mom.
okay. I hope to see a dog. That would be the greatest thing. Yeah, I'm always pro dog.
Yeah, and you have in-house goblins as well, right, Chuck?
We have 2 in-house goblins, yeah, and a child. So I guess kind of 3 abstractly. The 2 are like mutts. One is just a red dog, and the second one's Snoobug. We call her like a Franken Corgi Shepherd. She's like if you took a giant corgi head and screwed it onto a German Shepherd's body, and she has full legs but runs like she's a corgi, so she kind of does this weird bunny hop, but she looks like a full dog. So she's a bizarre animal. She's sweet, but total goblin.
They say that corgis were how the Fae folk used to travel from their own realm into ours. So you would end up having all these armies of corgis just showing up in the middle of a war, and things just happened after that point.
Well, if they rode ours,
pretty great.
Efficient.
It is a pretty great psychological warfare choice because, like, okay, it's gonna like bite off your head, but it's also a corgi, so like.
So what do we do? What do we do? I don't know. We've got cannon. You're not going to use cannon against the corgi. Come on.
No, of course
too
not.
awkward. Yeah.
Now, we've got 3 cats. We've never been a dog household, but we have had dogs. We had Shadowfax, the terrier, and we had Euclid, the coonhound. Both of whom have crossed the Rainbow Bridge into the land of Noms. We got 3 cats, one of whom is my wife's favorite. His name is William. She refers to him as the house gremlin. So gremlins are a thing, absolutely. They have 4 legs, and they're very short. And they are getting into everything, all kinds of. The 2 upstairs cats are decent mousers. We found that out after we unearthed the corpse of a mouse underneath the stove in the upstairs kitchen this afternoon, this morning. And then Sharpie, who got that name after we found her sitting on a Sharps container from a hospital, is the basement cat. So she's my my goddaughter's cat. That's her human. She doesn't want to deal with the rest of us. It's perfectly fine. We're all good. We're all here. Weird gremlin goblin family.
I've only got the one cat which I lost in the divorce.
But it was never really your cat then, was it?
That's debatable. The cat we literally got when it was days old. Its mother had abandoned it. It had one dead eye, and it literally would nurse in my armpit thinking there was a nipple in there somewhere. So it was definitely my cat.
Okay,
but,
my bad.
I was just telling the story today. Actually, I have an unfinished story I got to get back to one of these days where the main character is a dog. That's the perspective character. The dog is half setter, half pointer. It's a poinsettia. And the story evolves from there.
Chuck,
Yes.
I left the East Coast, sorry, Bochucks, I guess.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I left the East
All the
Coast to move into the desert wilderness, but I've always admired your moving further into Eastern wilderness, which to me, having grown up out West, is some of the most spooky of all wildernesses. And I love the staircase in the forest concept here. And I love in your work the sense of place, but like, tell me about this spooky staircase that you want us to walk up.
Seriously.
Spooky staircases are like weird interstitial architecture is such a fascinating thing. Like when you find something that doesn't belong somewhere, it's so great. And I was like, I had the idea for a long time to write this book because like there's all kinds of I live in this great nexus of a lot of weird folklore. Some that like even where I grew up we grew up at the base of a mountain, and it wasn't a mountain, it's just a giant hill, but everyone called it fucking a mountain. And like even right there, it was like we had all these pieces of folklore literally focused on just that mountain. We had a gravity hill. There was a church at the top where you could race the devil at midnight. There were caves where some treasure had been lost from these. Some people said they were cowboys, but actually they were really like real people, the Doan brothers, who were sympathizers to the British during the Revolution. So like just right there was all this great folklore. We had a bunch of weird broken down ruins and stuff on the Buckingham Mountain itself. So I'd been long wanting to write something about kind of that idea. And then I was up at a bookstore up in New Hampshire called Gibson's in Concord, one of the best bookstores around. And I had mentioned that was like kind of next on my docket. People were like, oh, there's like a really famous staircase in the woods near here. And it was Madame Cherry's castle. And I was like, they didn't think it was where I was headed because I was actually headed to Vermont the next day. But it was actually on the way. So I wound my way to find this bizarre old castle staircase in the woods in part of these ruins. And I was like, yep, that seals the deal. This is absolutely, I'm in the right place with this book.
Yeah.
Yeah, my wife and I go up to Vermont a couple of times a year. We go to Pennsylvania because we've got friends living in Pittsburgh, and Lancaster is, of course, you go there to eat at Miller's on the way there and on the way back. We used to do a lot of camping because we were younger, and everything didn't hurt quite as badly, just sleeping on the floor or on the ground. And so we had. I can't remember the proper name of the place, and that's a disservice to the campground because I should be able to remember this because it's really a gorgeous place. There was one area of it. The trees were dark, and all the trees were like twisted together, and there were these old stone walls all over the place. And we just started calling it the creepy campground. Yep. And my wife, who has a thing for fairies, was the only one that ever actually dared to go into that area just to ask for permission for the rest of us to hang out for a day. And so, okay,
just be sure.
Next morning, we're all still there. Everything is good. The car is not filled with chocolate pudding. We both have both our feet, right hands, left hands. It's all good. No one just did.
And both feet on the right side of your body, I hope.
Yes.
By the way, that was a
both
serious
feet on
escalation.
the right side of your body would be bad. But.
Yeah, that was a serious escalation in consequences from car filled with pudding to we have both of our feet.
Yeah,
I mean,
one is fun and the other one is.
Yeah, and I lived in rural Japan for 2 years, so I've got so much Japanese lore in my head, just things to compare to. You don't want to you don't want to go into the bamboo with a bad attitude because bamboo trees have a tendency to carry grudges, and they have ways and means and ideas, and there's an entire, just watch any Miyazaki movie for like 2 or 3 times and you will see everything that goes on in Japanese folklore. So that's where my brain lives half the time, and the other time my brain lives in the world of libraries, which is which John, is not a good place for someone to read all the time.
Yeah.
With what you just said, when are you pivoting from science fiction to horror?
Who is this? What's this?
John over here. He's a science fiction author. He's on this podcast, but he's a sci-fi author.
Yeah, you do.
I'm a sci-fi author, but I've done more than a few stories and books that have real horror through lines. One of which I'm actually thinking about revamping. A story I wrote for At the Helm #3, which is a sci-fi anthology years ago. I'm thinking of resubmitting to Chris Ryan's Soul Scream anthology. So we'll see if that actually works.
Nice. Caitlin, do you have anything horror in the pipeline, or are you kind of still in science fiction land? Or
Well, I end up all over the place, and I've always loved the sort of fiction where the horror sneaks up on you. And I think that oftentimes we find horror in our different genres, because we're always looking at how we're connecting with life in general. I'll say I do have a couple of things out now that sort of scratch that itch a little. One is a piece that I've produced with a company called Story City, and they're a location-based experience platform out of Canada. We just released the first in our global adventure series, and that's Fright Night Ghost Tours, where you are exploring as a paranormal investigator, and you can play the story anywhere. But it takes you through different places and manifestations. And of course, it's a choice-based game. So your choices have real impact on the outcome, and replaying is part of the fun. I also have been working with Elevate Pictures, where I'm formally employed now, on a project called the Signal Network, which is a multi-channel network of actual paranormal investigators. So we have a whole suite of people who are out doing their own live readings, their own investigations. It's not fiction, but it is trying to explore that liminal space, that otherworldly world in a serious way. And those are very fun.
Have you ever done the paranormal investigation?
I have not. Kind of like when I've worked in space, I was not the person going to space.
It's wild. Like it's fun. Like I've gone on weekends where they're like, that's the experience, and it's fascinating.
And I'll be honest, growing up, I had no shortage of access to the strange and unusual. I, as a child, would often see people in fog, people in mists, and I've had night terrors or visitations. So for me, I'm like, it's not necessarily a mystery that these things happen, but how do they manifest? Who is with you in that moment? And as an adult, I'm a bit more chill about it. But I also think that, just because you learn how something works doesn't make it not magic, doesn't make it not spiritual or present. And I think a lot of my work is at least that people are publicly aware of, is very focused on creating something that is widely mass consumer, or is able to hit specific marks for an audience to teach them something, or to build towards a commercial goal. And those things usually go hand in hand if you're doing them well. But in my fiction work that I've been working on, but in classic, I'm the person who's working on a novel that has yet to come out. It was a shitposting site for 3 years, but it isn't a novel yet. It's kind of a combination of magic and business and horror, because the scariest things I've ever encountered have been people doing very mundane things and making very mundane choices without understanding the consequences. And magic and horror give us the means to talk about those things, but it's also, how do we understand what's going on in our lives? How are we going to understand how someone else's completely insane choice to us now manifests every day in our lives? And what it is that you can do to sort of counter that in your own life, within your own scope. It's not easy. But fiction gives us some great tools to do that. I feel like I just talked around your question quite a bit. But the short answer is, I am not at this point in my life investigating haunted mansions on purpose. But I'm super excited to help other people do that.
But you might be accidentally every day.
I love the on purpose sentence there.
It's a key part of that sentence.
Yeah, I mean, I live in a part of the world with a lot of history, and a lot of a lot of the New Mexico Catholicism has a lot of spiritual components to it. So it's easier to live in a place where the sense of the beyond and the present is more connected than.
So Caitlin was talking a little bit about some of her philosophy behind what she's doing. I kind of want to ask you that one, Chuck. what is it you want to do when you tell a story?
Oh, it's really simple and basic. I don't have any high-minded philosophy. I mostly just want people to first and foremost feel something, and then ideally, secondarily, I just want to make them think about things. And those are really two basic things. And entertainment obviously is sort of the overall package that I'm putting those things in. But I really like to try to write with intentionality, writing a chapter and trying to say, I want people to feel a certain way when they read this chapter. And I'm not always going to get that right. I understand that. And sometimes also I write a chapter and I don't know how people are going to feel when I write it, because I don't know how I'm going to feel when I'm writing it. And that's okay too. But then trying to give them that sense of, strange ideas that kind of get in their head and they have to chew on them for a while is always fun. A book like Wanderers let me sort of really mess around with a lot of different things. But at the end of the day, I write for me first and foremost. So when I'm really hitting that first draft, it's about doing something for myself. And frequently, especially to lens it through horror, I am often trying to grapple with anxieties and fears and all the things that bother me. And I find that in the same way of like summoning demons into a chalk or salt circle where you can kind of control them and grapple them, I find that the fictional form is a great place to summon those particular demons of anxiety and wrestle with them in a sort of a different context, sort of outside of the arena that you might normally be fighting them in. So that's probably, not a great philosophy for writing, but it's definitely a reason for doing it.
I'm completely with you. I was on Nick Leshy's podcast, and he asked, why do you write horror? And I said, it's the literature of empathy.
Yeah.
And I'm hearing a lot of that resonating in what you're saying as well. It's horror writers are the most empathetic people I've ever run into. I mean, you can't scare people if you don't understand people.
Yeah,
and
I agree with that.
Exploring that is a big part of why I write what I write. But to follow up on that, with the work that you're doing, what's been your favorite feedback, your favorite response from audience? What's been the thing that made you feel that you really hit what you wanted to hit, that you got where you wanted to go?
I like when I get the emails where they're like, and they say this in the nicest way possible, like, what the fuck is wrong with you? Like, what did you do? Like, why is this happening? Like, I really like, and I know when I'm writing a part of a book and I'm writing a part where I'm like, I'm going to get emails about this. I love that. I love that. And it has nothing to do with anything particularly high-minded. It just means I pushed a finger into their breastbone and touched their actual heart, like for a moment, without even meaning to.
I would call that success. No matter what else happens in this life, you get an email and ask WTF, and you base that's it. That's a score.
Yeah. Every book, if I get that, I'm happy.
Yeah.
Let me flip it to the other side. What was the weirdest response you ever got?
No. I mean, I wrote Star Wars, so like the weird responses were. All of them were weird responses at that point. I mean, not all of them, but certainly a lot of very, very weird responses, given that it got sort of thrown into politics and a lot of strange, culture war moments inadvertently. But in terms of horror, writing horror, the weirdest responses, I think the ones are the ones where people want to judge horror like morally, where they feel like what a character does, especially in a horror, but really in any book, has some reflection on an author's morality or the readers of horror, where they judge like, well, if you like horror, you're this. So I find those to be particularly weird when somehow this world of fiction, and horror by its nature is always somewhat transgressive, and certainly there's a level of actual transgressive horror, but I think at its level, all horror has some transgression to it. To sort of judge those things from this kind of upper balcony of like looking down on it always feels like it misses the entire point and value of horror in the first place.
Yeah, and I'm sorry, Caitlin, you're going to say?
Yeah, no, I was just going to say, I feel like there's a lot, like I do a lot of work with communities of fans, inviting them to be part of the creative process.
Right.
And sometimes I see a tendency of like everything I like has the virtues that I ascribe to it, and
Yes.
anything I don't like is not. And you see that in a lot of online comments and a lot of conversations, and it really doesn't matter what the art is, you see those reactions.
Do you think
Um,
that's because of like social media? Is as just because
mm,
you know, or no, or is it just a natural
I
feel?
think it's like this takes me back like I, strangely, I've been thinking a lot about art school.
Sure.
Because I had the good fortune to go to a theater school with a really strong design focus. So I'm thinking back to a lot of things that my, most intimidating design teachers talked about in theater, and sort of, what you want to do as an artist, and the basic definition they gave is art is something that makes you feel something. And so that's a baseline that I've always worked from. But then anticipating what the person is going to feel from it is not your job.
Mm.
And that's something that also really colors the work I do. Like, um, when I was working on Batman, I spent a few years working with DC and some startups that were doing uh, Web3 based community programs. And we got some really amazing, fun pieces out of that. It was a new Batman series that was defined and written in real time by Dan Abnett with the votes of fans, called Batman the Legacy Cowl. And we went into it knowing what demon we were going to grapple with, more or less. We had incredible creative teams behind it, but we also knew it was going to be very much guided by the fans themselves. And when I first thought about it, I thought this was going to be real Batman horror, Killing Joke, Court of Owls, like deep horror. But despite it grappling with ideas of legacy and AI and hypnosis and some of these deeper things, the votes and the conversations with fans actually took it to a different place. And I think that there's something where, like, when you have a big group project, in my experience, it's really hard to keep it horror because there's something about working together in communion, creating something
Mm.
that is by its nature generative, that has so many positive elements to it. It's hard not to make it less horrifying.
Yeah.
So we have these amazing books, and I think it's a really brilliantly crafted comic series. It's a great Batman story. And with it, we also were running online games in real time. So people were voting on the components of the story world that they then got to play in almost immediately. It
Mm.
was a really intensive writing process, but what the most exciting thing for me watching was people arguing about it, people speculating, people really getting into that creative process in a way that usually you only feel in a writer's room or in a great room with your friends, or in, sometimes in a convention with new friends who you've just made. But almost every time I've done one of these programs with super fans or something where there is a collaborative thing, um, the tone and tenor of the conversations, there might be persistent arguments, but people end up being their better selves
Yeah.
if they're going to stick around for any amount of time, and helping people in that community be their better selves. So for me, I'm like, it's worked if this has empowered someone in some way. And
Yeah.
we get a lot of feedback because in those communal programs, we're doing constant conversation, constant sourcing. And, we have people who start businesses together. There's almost always a few people who are like, because I was able to have this supportive community, I'm pursuing my art instead of this drudgery that I was in before. This has helped me realize I can do this too. Um, and sure, there are people who say gnarly things, but I think at its core, there is something about that communal process that it really helps us be stronger, helps us be braver. And even when the topic may be something that is deeply terrifying, we end up finding our courage in one another, you know?
Yeah. But like, does that, I mean, that's siloed from your sort of average current social media experience, right? Like,
Well,
let's say
I mean,
Twitter, or like the sea of people where algorithmically you are rewarded for having a more challenging take, right? If you are reviewing something, having that sense of like, even if it's just let's say a controversial take, or approaching media as if it's not just like, hey, I liked it and here's why, but like, well, this person is this, or this is a bad thing, or horror is a problem because of this. Like, I've seen some of those takes, especially like horror is a problem or something morally judged genre. To me, first of all, that attitude has always been around, because I think people tend to justify their opinions kind of morally speaking, as opposed to like just having an opinion. You feel like you're more righteous if you can have it. But I think social media algorithmically will amplify that. And then when it amplifies it, other people view that reward structure and will do the same thing. And then if you're likelier to get responses, you're likelier to have it shared again and again. And so I think it creates a slightly more adversarial environment where, the audience can be a little different. You can very much see it depending on the platform. Something like Blue Sky, I don't find it there nearly as much as I would on like old Twitter or maybe even Threads, where it feels like you're
also sometimes a matter of time, because I think unfortunately Blue Sky is going to go the way everything else has, and then the next thing will come up and it'll be much, much cleaner for a while.
It could, depending on how they build it. Yeah,
you're totally right about it being a matter of scale, though, and it's for Batman Legacy Cal, we had several cruise ships worth of people showing up week to week, month to month to participate. But when I say that, we're still talking about 10,000 people, and it's very different than the conversation where you're yelling in public with hundreds of thousands of people.
Right.
And so, like, there's a lot of craft that goes into how do you create that invitation to draw people into a world with you, versus I'm just going to speak broadly to the widest marketplace about something. And what I think, I spend a lot of time thinking about the business of this sort of thing, because that's also part of my job. Like, all of the algorithmic direction that we are subject to now on these platforms, on one hand, it's a survival of the strongest communities type environment, where to create something sustainable, to have a project or a community that's going to be able to persist and grow, you have to cultivate that around something, whether it's an art or a concept or a character. But it's also increasingly difficult to find the one that appeals best to you, or to share one and find that audience. It's not that it's ever been easy, but it's incredibly difficult work.
Harder.
And so if you have a community and an audience already, it helps a lot. If you can connect with others who do have other communities, it helps a lot. But the expectation for growth is also very different than I think it was even 5 years ago. If you're starting something new on those platforms that is genre or doesn't necessarily fit into the face first to camera vlog style, that may have the largest audience, but may not be the audience you're actually looking for to go with you on a journey into a story together.
Sure.
Well, kind of the key word in all that is curation. And I've been watching this shift where we had all these communities where everybody is welcome, and we're starting to realize, no, because when you welcome the wolves in, you kill the sheep. And you actually need to curate. And yes, some people are not welcome, and that's not gatekeeping if it's done right. It's protecting the community and making it a space where people can actually enjoy what they enjoy.
One thing that I've noticed working with the indie publisher community is that a lot of authors start off small, but they know what they're doing, and the first thing they do is work on creating stuff that a particular set of fan wants to read. A lot of these guys have very narrow readerships, but those readers are very devoted. They're the first in line to buy absolutely everything that comes off the assembly line. And some of them have managed to parlay them into multiple, series, multiple things like that. They've got audiobooks, they've got games are being written, all these other things going on. But as you get bigger, your effort becomes commensurate with that because you're hiring new people to help you manage the whole thing. And after a certain point, it starts to break apart into separate communities. You got people who say, this was the best series. No, that's the best series. And you end up with this wacky bifurcation going on. So in a way, that's actually pretty cool because you're getting multiple new audiences for multiple new products, and it's happening in a relatively organic way. A lot of these guys are bottom-up producers rather than top-down producers, what you'd find in major media studios or things like that. This is what we're going to have this year. We're going to have that next year. And I've never worked with any of those studios, so I have no idea what I'm talking about. I've worked with the small guys, though, and some of them are fairly big guys now.
They do make themes and plans,
yeah,
but there is, I don't know, if you've worked in a co-creative community, there are some similarities.
Yes.
You have the spine of something that you're working towards. You have the parameters of specific projects. But there is a lot of testing and learning. There's testing, will this work in this way? What are our audience members actually doing? And it's a different animal when you have Gotham City, or
Yes.
you have Halo, or you have the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. Like, sure, you've got New York and a couple of those, but you also, like, you have a legacy where you already have spent weeks, months, years of someone's lives in that world, and it becomes much easier to connect with something that's new or has surprises in it, or things that aren't necessarily cookie cutter. It's harder, but not impossible. And I'll say, like, the scaling questions are like, well, what is it that you're trying to do? Because, you know, obviously there's nothing wrong with being a reader and enjoyer of work. I am a reader and enjoyer of works. I read and enjoy Chuck's works. I read and enjoy John's works. I read and enjoy other Chuck's works. Which Chuck is which, you get to decide, viewer. But
not all Chucks.
you know, it's the way that you want to present something to someone at each of those different levels of fandom or interest is going to be different. So all of those scale questions of our, you know, promotion, how do you get people to know that this exists, and is it similar to something they already love? But the number of people who engage in active fandom behaviors or want to reach out, like, it takes a lot for anyone to be moved to the point that they want to email you or tweet at you. And I aging myself tweeting, but comments, you know, it actually takes a huge amount of emotional impact for something to stick with someone to the degree that they have that feeling enough that they want to yell at you about it, or say something kind about it. You know, you've truly hit the mark when you get that answer. And I think it used to be that you only had this conversation if you were working inside a publisher, a distributor, or a studio. And now we have this conversation for all authors, all creators, all artists, where it's like, how do I think about this thing that is often considered separate from the art of storytelling? And I love looking at older types of storytelling when I think about this, because, like, Mark Twain was meant to be read out loud. Newspaper serials were coming out every week and were something that would be shared and talked about. And all of these older mediums that we had were built in a way where it had to be more personal. You had to build that more personal connection, and the behaviors of how we engage with the written word and stories were very different. And you'd get readers who were highly sought after to read famous works in a way that we kind of have on TikTok now, but not really. But also the act of reading itself was very different than it was today. And I guess I'm sort of, you know, most of my career, I've been grappling with, how do we create experiences that are going to move people in a different shape, or tell this story to this shape or this form? How do those things fit together? And it's a really fun challenge, but it is a moving target. And for each project, it's a moving target, not just each epoch of technology we use to communicate with each other.
And moving in multiple directions. I was just watching a video where they were talking about changes in filmmaking technique, because we now have digital cameras, because we now have different light sensors, things that are just strictly on the technical side that have transformed it. And one of the things the guy says is, I look at this stuff and it doesn't feel like film to me. It doesn't feel like theater. It doesn't feel like a movie experience. And then I show my kids the old stuff and they go, why is this all glitchy? Because what you grow up with becomes your definition of normal.
Yeah.
So in addition to the actual content and everything else, the mechanics of delivery, like you were talking about, the difference between a serial and the newspaper and the way that we deliver content now, the immediacy of feedback as opposed to it'll show up in the mail is huge.
Yeah. Yeah. And
I mean,
I think in a similar tool means like there's a toolkit to scare people.
Yeah.
There's a toolkit to scare people. I could scare someone. Like I know how to do that. I know how to inject a horror. Like it's the technique of it, the mechanics of it. And that's what all this like frame, shape, doable. But what are you going to do with that?
Yeah.
And I think like that artistic process is fascinating. And the authors, like Wanderers, hands down, like freaks me out. Every time I think about it, I get the ick because frankly, cordyceps is like the freakiest thing I can imagine. Like there aren't freakier things on earth that I've discovered that scare me more. Except for the ocean, which is its own business.
Oh,
yes.
all we
I
can
was gonna
talk
say.
thing about how terrible the ocean is.
Like
It's a giant map.
just like
It
I am
stuff,
more
it swallows
comfortable.
everything.
More comfortable on land where most things are just trying to kill you with blood fallout. Like it's gonna be fine. But but you know, it's sort of all of that other stuff is mechanics. Like at the end of the day, there are differences between a scary movie or a scary story and like a true horror. And I think that is a great human component to the creative process. Like, however much it's mimicked, and mimics are their own like highly specific horror. Like, I'm just waiting for an Amazon box mimic story that really hits. But you know, I think it's been interesting to see in the past couple years, like a return to less gruesome violence in horror. In movies at least, and trying to look at different perspectives or a kind of a return to demons. Like I think Head Count was one of my favorite movies I saw in the past couple years, and it is actually a mimic but not an Amazon package, and the way that you can play with subtlety and nuance of senses, the way that it engages the audience in figuring out who is or isn't who they say they are. And you know, I don't know, there's something really intensely magical about being able to create those deeper works, those deeper spells, those deeper moods. And yeah, I know it's a horror podcast, but those same methods, those same ideas, if you can do that to scare someone, the way that you build that tension into science fiction, which, you know, is just a different setting, and you can do horror, you can do a progressive peon to helping people be their better selves, and maybe both. But I think you have to be able to scare yourself with it a little.
Oh yeah.
John, like I know Chuck talked about like, you know, being able to write for himself. What's it like for you two? Do you scare yourselves?
For me, the scale is a little different. So I grew up with the story that I died when I was 4. And that puts you in a completely different perspective on life and on everything else. I have actually held my dead child in my arms. We got her back. Turned 40. Okay. But under the age of 1, died. So my scale of horror is very different than other people's scale of horror. I generally don't write things that scare me per se, but the scariest thing, you know, it's the Scooby-Doo thing, the worst monsters are humans. It's when I write people that I get the closest to being scared by what I write. And just to amplify what you were saying before about you can take it anywhere, I've got 5 Westerns out right now. I'm about to release a slew more. And all the things I've learned as a horror writer, as a science fiction writer, they all translate, because you're right. It comes down to creating character, creating connection, creating plot in a way that draws people in. And, it's not as simple as put them on a horse. It's a Western. You need to understand the tropes. You need to understand what the reader's expectations are. But yeah, if you understand how to do it, you can do it in almost anything. John, I think I cut you off before you got to speak.
Horror is getting scared is easy because we've all got the same fears. We feel failure, we feel abandonment, we feel loneliness, we feel all these obvious things. But getting deep down into it is a place I don't go very often, which is probably why I stick to sci-fi more. Getting sci-fi to have an impact is easy. I know how to make people angry, and that's what keeps them invested in the story. The last series we dropped a little earlier this year, A.K. DeBoff and I came up playing in her universe. And in my particular series, who you root for as the hero really does depend on your point of view. And a lot of that depends on the preconceptions you've got coming into the story. What do you think the good guys look like? What do you think the bad guys look like? They both have good arguments. Which side are you going to put your bet on? And things like that. The military fiction is it can be horrific because the level of violence you end up using is pretty awesome. And that can be almost like a drug because you've got the heart pumping action going. And now, wait a minute, now what do I do? I'm exhausted. Now, how do I bring this to an end? So I try to think more strategically about that. You pace it out and then you have a more conventional goal, and you've got a moral goal. You have an emotional goal when you're trying to hit. And I've done a lot of books. I don't think I'm ever going to get to the point where I know exactly what I'm doing in any given part of this of the process, because that's what you need an editor and a beta reader for, and that's also a bunch of people I'm working on curating. But ultimately, and the interesting thing about horror is the fact that the awful things that we do to ourselves and each other really do transcend pretty much any setting you want to think of. When I think of horror, I think of fairy tales because fairy tales are terrifying. Because that's the thing. They're supposed to terrify. They're supposed to teach you not to go into the forest after midnight. They're supposed to teach you not to take candy from strangers. They're supposed to teach you that it is not an act of love to cut up your dead girlfriend and put her heart inside your own. Things like that.
Good note.
Thank you.
Something that springs to mind about what you said, John, is it's also really interesting in these settings that we create what people aren't scared of. One of the things when I was writing, and I still do write for some of these astronautic training tours, was talking to astronauts and hearing all of the myriad ways that space is constantly trying to kill you.
Yeah, that's really like space opera.
Yep.
My very favorite is the most important chore that you have to do, no matter how you're feeling, is cleaning the air filters. Because if the air is not moving in your spaceship or space capsule, your own exhalations will fill a bubble around your face and suffocate you. And I'm like, yeah, you're just doing your normal stuff in space, growing a chili pepper or looking down at the magnificence of Earth with all of its available air, and just constantly a hair's breadth away from pretty freaky death.
Of your own body committing pretty freaky death against you by its normal process. Yes.
Yeah.
Being a lifelong asthmatic has taught me that your lungs can kill you without warning at any time.
Yeah, true that.
And I think it speaks to both what you were saying, Charles, my parents were 40 years older than me. And so their thresholds for my father grew up in the American Southeast. He experienced multiple measles epidemics, but he was pre-polio vaccine, and children were constantly just passing away. So he grew up with a very different baseline set of what was normal than I did growing up in the 80s. And we don't necessarily see that when we're reading an older book or novel or watching an older movie where the threat of nuclear war is just the baseline constant that everyone shares. And one of the things I love about your worlds, Chuck, is that they take you into a different environment. Like I think the first ones of yours I read were the Atlanta Burns series. And that's a really really clear modernistic setting, but also one that's super realistic. But the norms are different in some ways than other books I've read. And they felt more true to life to me because it was just sort of like we're living in the environment we're living in rather than explaining the environment we're living in.
Yeah, there's less world building when you do something a little more local, so to speak. It's like I don't have to tell you how the rules work here. I mean, there's a few moral rules you kind of have to grapple with, but they're usually more inferred than explained. So no,
well, one of my favorite bits like that is Lynn Abbey wrote a book called The Guardian, and this woman finds out that the apartment she's living in is basically a gateway to hell, for lack of a better way of explaining it. And she finds the diary from the owners who understood how to deal with all this. And the problem is everything that was normal to them, they left out of the diary. So it was exactly that, the lack of world building in the diary, the lack of the day-to-day details that they clearly knew was what almost defeats her in the course of the story. And I found that lovely and charming and fascinating.
Yeah. Oh, that's cool.
Another favorite of mine is Grady Hendrix. I feel like he does these really well, like Horror Store, which dives into how retail design might accidentally design something that was unexpected. And I think there's something in that where you're sort of in that slow boiling water, where you're in an environment that feels familiar, but the things you don't think about around you reveal different aspects of what might not actually be as okay when you in your day-to-day life when you think about it. And then a really great craft of the writer is then to add to that layer with something that you did not expect.
Yeah, Horror Store is also just a great critical product, just like in a general sense. Yeah, really cool.
No.
So Caitlin, you should absolutely not ask John about the lamp room after saying that.
The lamp room was actually a lot of fun, and I do not regret that experience one bit.
You need to go into the backstory just a little bit there.
The backstory of that is that we were, this most recent StokerCon, right, Chuck?
Yep.
Yeah. So we are in Connecticut, which is a scary place anyway. That's where the Stepford wives live. Yeah. So you're wondering
we've all
about
been
that.
to Connecticut.
And the thing is, it's at a horror convention, and you've got horror fans, you've got horror writers, and we're all talking to each other all the time, and we're all percolating ideas, and things are being said. And eventually someone mentions the lamp room, and no one really knows what that is. But the thing is, we know it's in the hotel somewhere. And the thing is, we don't know why it's there. And no one really can tell us this because you're not talking to the people who are organizing how everything gets stored, in the thing. So eventually we end up finding this floor and in front of the freight elevator on the 11th floor or something like that. And the thing is, and my wife is saying, is this a lamp room? And I'm saying, I don't know. And so I'm basically getting on my knees, trying to look through the keyhole of this bloody door that looks like it has weathered 3 world wars and God knows what else, and I can finally see, oh my God, there are lamps in there. We did it. We found the lamp room. Yay. And the thing is, 5 seconds after I said that, the freight elevator opens and 40 other people who are all writers and bar fans come in, and everyone is looking for the lamp room. And we're all trying to figure out, how do we see this? Can we get in the lamp room? Who knows how to pick a lock? I don't know how to pick a lock. Do you have a credit card? I don't know. Do you have a lockpick? What are you going to do? We're going to brash the windows. No, you're not going to break the windows. Come on, it's a hotel. So this giant shared experience about the mystery behind the lamp room became this incredibly bonding sort of experience. And, it's just another horror convention, but we still talk about the lamp room.
Well, there was also a rumor that went around that only one of the lamps was lit.
Yes.
And that set off a whole...
That turned out not to be true because the lights were on in the lamp room, but the lamps themselves were not actually glowing. So
clearly the lamp room is a supernatural trap.
Yeah.
It is a thing. It's what we do.
Which
It'll
is
show
all
up in
way
a
of
story
saying you
someday.
guys should both come to StokerCon next year.
Totally. Absolutely.
That would be amazing.
What's Pittsburgh next year?
Pittsburgh, the year 26 and 27.
Yeah. Well, do you know? Is it June, July? I forget what it is.
It's usually April, I think.
Oh, is it that soon? Oh God.
Yeah.
How is that?
All right. Now I got to check. Hang on. I'm here.
Yep.
I got this.
I don't know how you all have been feeling about time lately, but it's been not
good.
acting the way it used to. I'm
It's
like,
been
again,
Monday
I'm
all
like,
year.
yeah, Monday all year.
The gears are slipping.
April,
All of it. Yeah.
All right,
April
guys.
feels like 2 days and 2,000 years from now.
Okay. StokerCon is from June 4th to June 7th.
See.
Nice.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
Exactly
Fake
like you
April.
said, John. You made no error whatsoever in that.
I have no idea what I'm talking about.
I heard only-
The problem with being a librarian is you don't know anything, but you know where everything is. So you know how to find everything you need, but facts just blur in your head after a certain
in and
point.
out. Yeah.
Everything, even the
And-
lamp room, which you found. So
And any writer who isn't friends with librarians is missing out, because it's one thing to Google something. It's another thing for someone to know where the like hidden thesis in the back shelf of the mystery library on the floor no one goes to is.
Yeah.
And
And
Librarians are
frankly, you need the hidden knowledge.
oh yeah.
And the Google is becoming less useful with each day that passes, but the
Mhm.
libraries will be here until the forces of darkness burn us all down.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I
Hopefully
appreciate
later.
librarians holding it down.
One hopes.
The last StokerCon intersected with a library conference intentionally so that we had overlap,
Mhm.
and
Yes.
that was really amazing.
That's the way to do it.
Yeah.
We had our spooky librarians with us.
Yes.
Not just John and Lara. We had lots of spooky librarians with us.
Medical librarians, academic librarians. We had a couple of librarians who were specialists in really esoteric forms of history or archaeological research, things like that. It was actually really neat.
That is awesome.
So, Chuck, you talked a little bit about this with me when we were emailing back and forth before this call, but what's with the apples?
No. Yeah.
I asked that question intentionally broad to mess
Yeah.
with you.
What's with the apple? Well, they're watching us right now. That's all I can tell you. They're out there.
I've got a tree outside my window with apples still
really?
out in December. Yeah.
Oh, that's
We
good.
moved in. They're the only trees, like, thankfully I moved onto land that had stuff that already was growing on it, because
Oh.
I am not a garden witch.
Yeah.
It's just
Well,
not my
I
skill
hear
set
you have
yet.
the kingfisher near you.
Oh, yeah.
Definitely.
Yes.
Green.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. Yeah, it's really great.
She is such a talent. I will say one of the scariest books I've read recently was A Sorceress Comes to Call.
Oh, I
because
haven't read
I-
Sorcerer's Yeah. Okay.
As someone who grew up with some female relatives who were heavily narcissistic, I've never read a better exposition of a character as a narcissist.
Yeah.
It's really deeply compelling, deeply disturbing, and true to my experience as an outsider looking into it. So, really excellent piece. Not horror explicitly,
No, but okay.
but
yeah.
horrifying in a depth.
Yeah.
But I'm distracting you from talking about the apples.
Oh, briefly before I get to clearly my favorite subject, apples. We were talking earlier about like how horror makes you feel and how it's. I mean, because I think it's actually very difficult for a horror novel or story to scare you. Like you don't get the jump scare component. It's more a deeper sort of septic level of dread and creep. But Ursula with the Twisted Ones manages kind of a jump scare in that book. Like actually, like really, like like you're like, oh my god, like it. So that's one of those books where like I feel shocked in a moment in that book. I won't spoil anything, but so for those who have not read it, you definitely read it for just for that, honestly. But she's such a fantastic storyteller. Apples are weird, and that's why I love them. I always thought apples were really dull fruits because you would go to the grocery store and they were not good. But then there was we had a farmer's market near us, and a new orchard started coming. I'm new to the market. Started coming there called North Star Orchard, and they had all of these bins of all of these apples that sounded like hobbits and vampires. None of them were familiar, and I was like, "This is like a prank. Like this is obviously none of these are real fruits you can eat." And they were like, "No, they're all very real." So I bought like one of each, and then I tried them all, and I was like, "These don't taste anything like the apples I am aware of." And then like you do just a cursory bit of research, and you realize that these like 5 or 6 apples I was eating were like paled in comparison to the thousands of varieties that both exist or have been lost to time and big agriculture. And then you sort of get into the ramifications of how it ties into mythology and folklore and history and just commerce with agriculture and certainly politics. Who gets to eat, who gets to grow. And the apple becomes this like just fascinating center of a really weird food web that crosses culture and mythology and religion and politics. And so I just was fascinated by it. Like I had no necessarily aims to write anything about it, but like I'm a fundamentally lazy author in that I don't tend to do the research like after the fact. Like I don't have an idea and then do research to support it. I have this mountain of research that I'm just interested in, and then I'm like, well, I guess I better do something with it. So, like, I roll around in the research like a dog, like just covering myself in its scent. And then the book happens.
I'll confirm for you that's a Chuck thing because I do a lot of that too.
Yeah, Chuck's
nice.
Yeah.
Well, I can tell you one thing. One of the few things I've recently learned about apples is that if you take an apple seed and you plant it and you get a fruiting tree from that seed, you get to name the apples after yourself.
You can, yeah, because that's a unique apple.
That is how that works.
That is not
nice.
the apple that you eat. Totally different apple.
One of the weirder experiences of my life is trying to explain to kids, because I have some myself. They're almost adults now, which is that's the most horrifying thing. Nothing has scared me ever in my life quite as much as having an 18-year-old who's on the dating apps.
Yes.
But I remember when I was, a kid, and we ate those apples, those 5, like maybe 5. Let's be generous and call it 5, and they kind of tasted like styrofoam. But the first time the supermarket carried a like variety of apple, I remember getting it and watching my dad eat it, and it was like that scene in Ratatouille where you go back to your childhood.
Yeah.
And I'm like, it's interesting for me because for me, my childhood apple was basically styrofoam.
Yeah.
So I'm like, how do we explain it?
Yeah.
How do we convey in art what it was like to go from no taste to flavor?
Yeah.
And to be surrounded by people who are going through this incredible return to flavor and sensation. Yeah, it's like those wild moments where a sense changes everything. Anyway.
Well, historically with apples too, you actually have periods of time where people don't realize you can eat apples for flavor. They thought you had to stew them or boil them, or more importantly, you made cider out of them. And often a sort of a funky spitter apple, like the apple you would definitely not want to eat, was really good for something like cider. So, and then suddenly when someone bites into one that's kind of a desserty snacking apple, and it's like, I didn't know that this was a thing nature would produce for me. And that becomes an entirely different experience historically for them. And it actually even changes certain economies. The Netherlands or England, there's periods where they become all about like the eating apple experience and how that's as a pride of their country, and just a fascinating sort of weave and weft of history. The apple's always kind of there for that.
I want to go back to what you said about dating apps, by the way, because I went from a 38-year marriage to dating for the first time in 38 years during pandemic lockdown on the dating apps. And I will tell you that it was, but the other thing it was some of the best character studies I've ever read. Because if you go on the dating apps and you're looking at women's profiles, you learn so much about how men can be terrible. You get so much of a deep dive, because you eventually run into the ones that are like, here's 5 things I never want to hear again, is the top line of their dating profile. And you're like, they were hurt. I don't want to date this person. I want to contact them just to apologize on behalf of my thinking. I want to see if they're okay. I want to check in. And reading through things like that and seeing the ones where it's buried 3/4 of the way down versus the ones where it's the top line, seeing the things that you have to infer from it became archaeology for me. I would go on things like OkCupid, where you can answer hundreds of questions, and I would read every answer because they let you put in things like, why did you say that? And even if I had immediately had no interest in this person, I felt compelled to read. It was my homework.
Mm-hmm.
I would read every word of the profile. I would look at every picture. I would go through every one of the questions. And I learned a tremendous amount about human nature by going through the dating apps. And, you know, your spouse might kill you if you do this, but I would recommend, if you're not going to date, you may want to go on the free versions of these apps just for the reading.
Yeah.
I met my wife on a dating app many years ago, and she the horror stories she told even back then made it very clear that, you know, men are, you're not all great.
Well, as a lady who grew up reading women's magazines, I promise you that the archive of 1990s horrors, as espoused by Jane or Cosmo, are plentiful. And I think that it's been really interesting for me as an adult woman watching as these sort of primary source narratives of dating horror stories. And some of these are like, dating horror stories, that was embarrassing, but a lot of them were dating horror stories, this is dangerous, this is awful. Like, I feel like women's magazines were talking about John Casablancas and Jeffrey Epstein and all of them decades before it was comprehensible news to the wider public. It was modeling scams, it was things like that. And so it's sort of it's hard because it sort of creates this different norm of expectation. And I think we see that even more now. And so much of these stories are common. And I think, like, for me now, things that I see that are like common stories but aren't talked about as much are like female narcissism, for example. Growing up in a family where that was part of our family culture, the conversations around female narcissism and its prevalence are always harder to have because those are short stories that were kept in the family, not talked about, or shameful to talk about, especially if the person who is affected is male. And I think we're sort of awash suddenly in these wide-ranging stories about ourselves where we see common themes starting to crop up, whether those are dating experiences in aggregate, and you end up seeing things over and over again, or conversations. You know, my husband and I have had some real arguments over the years because I am less online than he is. He's kind of a frontline internet combatant, which is his way. He wants to know why someone thinks the way they think, and I'm like, you think that way, I'm cool, I have other things to think about. But you know, where he'll have heard the same arguments over and over again, and if I say something that is similar to that, it's just like, you know, I'm like, I'm not a common thread, I'm here.
Right.
And we have to find a way to have like real legitimate conversations, even though someone is saying something that 1,000 other people have also said. And the more we wade into the waters of sort of shallow conversations or top level information about each other, like, there are things we have in common, there are ways that we engage or act, but it's a constant effort of understanding where that's coming from too. And you know, I think the dating thing is so fascinating because it's sort of the old Atwood quote of, you know, men are afraid women are going to laugh at them, women are afraid they're going to get murdered. And that's not untrue, but it's creating a lot of real pain in people prior to ever engaging as a person. And I've counseled many young male colleagues who have been terrified of normal interactions in the workplace because they are not predatory people. They want to act well, but they're scared of engaging in casual human ways, that there will be massive adverse consequences if they overstep it all. And I think women are often quite angry and quite forceful in how they communicate their concerns and boundaries and danger. And for young women especially, it's hard to figure out, okay, what is appropriate boundary setting and what isn't. And I was that way, which is why I say it. And it comes down to, we're seeing all of these stories. We can all see all of these stories in an aggregate that is in itself horrifyingly vast. Like how do we find anyone? How do we connect with any story? How do we cope with the vastness of this and the idea that it can be manipulated, and us with it, by a very small number of people, or by a line of code, or by a machine that just does it because it can. Um, and yeah, I'm sort of, that's the big horror I'm grappling with right now, y'all. Like, it's
That's a
the
very big horror.
immensity of the
Yeah.
universe and existence and all of these things, and how do we stay human with each other?
Mm.
I'd like an answer.
One
Yeah.
of my writing partners, Liz Ransdell, did a post that went viral that was called "Not All Men, but All Women," about the fact that she couldn't find a single woman who did not have at least one horror story about at least one man.
Oh yeah.
Oh, and I do, but I'm sure you three do too. Like,
Yeah.
not necessarily romantically, but we all have horror stories about one another too.
Yeah.
And I'm not trying to diminish the reality of that by saying it. I'm sort of like, what of our horrors are taking from us, you
Yes.
know? Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
My sister-in-law and I have a wacky relationship because we get each other on one level that isn't easy to communicate, because I, for my whole life, has basically been gravitating towards having women surround me as just in the workplace or personal relationships, things like that. And I just end up being surrounded by women, which is a weird thing for a straight guy to be able to say with it on his face. But she's in the same position because she's been gravitating towards groups of men for her whole life. So here's the thing. She ends up getting things done the way guys do. You end up, doing most of it in bars and things like that.
Yeah.
Although not so much drinking once you get to your 50s. I have been known as the guy who is willing to chase away a creepy guy. And I've chased away guys who are bigger than me, who are smaller than me. I know how to stare them down, and I don't have a problem with it. I'm happy to be of the service. But at the same time, it's really distressing to be asked to do this over and over and over again by all your female friends. And it's like, Jesus, when does it stop? Come on, guys, what are we doing wrong? Well, you're doing a lot of things wrong, to be totally honest. One, there are reasons why women pick certain men and don't pick others. And sometimes those are objectively obvious or not so objectively obvious. And sometimes it's just, two people have this wacky special connection, or they don't. And it's not the sort of thing you can actually make happen. And this is a through line in the series I just dropped. So yeah, it's something I've thought about a lot over the past 20, 30 years. At the same time, we're not in a social environment where you can change any of this easily or quickly or on demand. It's just the sort of thing that we need to muddle through one way or the other. And part of it is the fact that we really are terrified of talking to each other. We're terrified of being wrong. We're terrified of to be weak in the face of what we consider to be an existential struggle. And the social media is making everything more complicated, and instead of less complicated, we're actually distancing ourselves from each other. And we're going to get through it one way or the other, but I'm not sure what we're going to look like when we finally do. It'll either be a much better place for everyone, or it'll be a living hell. And you can't make those predictions.
Either or.
Some of each.
You don't know.
A little from column A. No.
Yeah.
I do firmly believe, though, that characters give us tools to help. I am fundamentally an optimistic person, despite the fact that I'm an extremely cynical person.
And we both. That's why we get along together.
I do think that ultimately we can figure this stuff out together. But I think that we often need people and characters to model the kind of bravery that we want to embody. And I see people empowered by characters.
Yeah.
So, I think the first time I met you, Wendig,
Hmm.
you were talking about Pandemic, the Sundance installation
Oh
that you
yeah.
and
It was
Lance Weiler put together.
uh-huh.
And I'm not going to pretend that didn't affect how I thought about lockdown. I'm not going to
Oh yeah.
pretend that Wanderers didn't help me think through what are my priorities relative to family members and
Mm,
caregiving.
sure.
And I think that a lot of the time, the characters who we engage with are easier for us to talk to intellectually
Hmm.
about some of those really profound horrors. And I'd love to sort of, I don't know, give you the floor to say something about it, Wendig, because I think fewer people know about the kind of experiential work that you've worked with, and more people know about your written work.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. I started in that similar space of doing experiential with quote unquote transmedia at the time. Um, my journey to that was like a weird one in that I was writing fiction. Well, first of all, I started in game design, but I had always wanted to write novels, and I was writing and failing to write good novels during that time. And then so I weirdly did what any upstart failed novelist would do, was apparently enter a screenwriting competition. And then I won the screenwriting competition, and that was the prize of that competition was a year-long mentorship with a guy named Stephen Susko, great writer, a king of adaptation at that time. And so I worked with him for a year and kind of learned stuff about screenwriting, but also like I was trying to have him help me figure out a novel, which I was like, I really don't actually care that much about screenwriting. I still mostly want to figure out this novel, and I want to take the novel and turn it into a screenplay, mostly just so I can then turn it back into a novel so it makes sense. And he was like, whatever, it's your time. So he did help me do that, but then I really enjoyed that process. And then he introduced me to Lance at the end of that, because he and Lance were friends. And so Lance and I started working together, and Lance was obviously working a lot in that space of experiential things and still does to this day. And I really enjoyed working with all of that, and doing stuff with him on the side, and also still working on film work, but then also trying to find what the experiences around the film work would be. And so we did digital narrative called Collapsis, and we obviously did the pandemic work that ended up at Screen Dance, and that was the year after we had gone to we were accepted into the Screenwriters Lab with a film that sort of tied to that. And so I enjoyed all of that. I think for me, the big thing was it was a lot of, for lack of a better term, moving parts. And I didn't feel as well in control of it as I wanted to. And like there is a part of me that's I'm a very simple storyteller. All of those moving parts that come with sort of an experiential thing, I enjoy experiencing more than I enjoy creating. I actually had a point where I was allowed to and invited to work on the Star Wars experience, the hotel experience that they did. And I was like, I turned it down at the end, despite a sort of a rigorous vetting, and I didn't even really know what it was. Because it was just, it felt like it was taking me away from the goal of just telling the story the way I wanted to tell it, which was ultimately in a written format. My brain is not big enough to, like Lance is, and certainly you, and talking to Andrea, like the creators that work in that space are ultimately very visionary. You have very like, to you, the storytelling space is a sky full of stars. And for me, it's not. It's like a moon. I see one light, and I'm like a moth, and I want to move toward it quickly and efficiently. I don't necessarily have the capacity to think of it in this broad way that keeps me sane.
I will say that I admire that tremendously, because that focus is harder to come by for me. You get focused on a moon, and then you get up closer, and then that's no moon, and then it's shooting at you, and you're surrounded by TIE fighters, and like there's a shiny thing over here. But I think that there was something in the way you talked about the experience of creating your pandemic experience, where you were challenging, it's sort of, was it zombies?
No,
Zombie-ish?
not
Like, no, but
exactly.
like,
No, I mean
yeah,
zombie
but
adjacent, but no, not zombies. Yeah,
um, and I heard echoes of it when I read Wanderers, because
sure.
it was the question of, you know, that a loved one is in danger and may be a danger.
Hmm.
And what do you do in that situation? Do you let them in? Do
Yeah,
you help them and give them aid?
sure.
And I think that one is one of the harder things that we grapple with in a society where we're increasingly far apart from each other, where
Sure.
the difficulty in relationships
Yeah.
is easier to talk about than the benefits of relationships.
Sure. Yeah. The
And
togetherness of community. I mean, it's one of the things,
yeah.
one of the points of trying to write, like, and it was not one of the points of writing the film part of quote unquote pandemic and then the pandemic
Mhm.
short, was ultimately about the danger of other people. But then I really wanted with something like Wanderers and the sequel Wayward to go with what ultimately has been proven true, because we're talking about cynicism and optimism. The optimism of that and the reality of it, and certainly reading like the work of someone like Rebecca Solnit will tell you this too. People work together in crisis. They don't actually fracture and become these like siloed nightmare landscapes of people. Like a zombie apocalypse film is one of the most pessimistic things you can see, because generally people are the true enemy. The zombies are an environmental disorder. They're similar to a flood. They're not really sentient. They're a monster that's mostly just an environmental danger to you. The real danger in those films is almost always the other humans. And I didn't want that to be the core of Wanderers and Wayward. I wanted community, the idea of the flock, sort of the way that they moved in the book, to be really the strength of what might survive any particular kind of calamity or turmoil that came out of that. I really wanted to embrace the community side of it. I mean, certainly there are also toxic communities and individuals. It's not like people are all, singing Kumbaya, and it's not, Care Bears stare and rainbows coming out of their tummies. But I really didn't want it to just be this sort of cynical and pessimistic sense of brutality. I really wanted that community to shine through that. So, yeah.
Yeah, it's funny the thing you said about zombies, because if you look at the earliest zombie work, you see a completely different thread that's not there, that's not environmental. It's the person has turned into the person you're afraid of, which comes back around to what Caitlin was saying.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of that was the Red Scare and the fear of communism and all the rest of it. Your friend might secretly be one of them. Your mother might become one of them.
Yeah.
That moment in Romero's work where you watch the brother take the sister because he's become a zombie and she can't process the idea that he's a danger.
Yeah.
That piece was there. And I really appreciate what you said, because yes, most zombie fiction have gone to exactly what you're saying. It's become an existential environmental thing that must be coped with, but it is the B plot in most zombie stories.
Mm-hmm. There's a great novel out this year, last January, Clay McLeod Chapman's Wake Up and Open Your Eyes. And that is ostensibly a zombie table. People watching some version of Fox News versus also people who are watching certain kinds of influencers online. And there's a demonic thread that goes through all of it. And the people who watch certain media obsessively become truly, literally possessed by it. And a nation becomes truly, literally, demonically possessed by it. And it's an absolutely chaos nightmare book. But it is definitely less about the sort of environmental zombie and more about what these people are actually becoming and how they're being slowly taken over and what results from their obsession and what it opens inside them and lets in.
Which also reminds me, have you guys ever seen Pontypool?
Oh yeah, Pontypool's great.
Yeah, definitely.
When you talk that way, and I've heard Craig read, and he's phenomenal. I'm not taking anything away from him doing what he did, but the description you gave, my brain is immediately going, I've got Stephen McHattie in the radio station, I'm watching Pontypool.
Yeah.
Yes.
We did it. I don't know what we did.
We did it. We did it.
Well,
Oh.
I could go on for another couple of hours. I know you guys have lives to get back to.
Unlike us.
Has been, well, we all have lives to get back to. It's just I'm sitting in a box of an office right now because we're consolidating our campus locations, and I'm in the campus that's going to disappear in a few weeks. So why I'm here is another story that I'm not going to go into. But let's just say that the actual library is being staffed by my staff, who are very capable and are working in the Bronx today. So
what you're really getting around to is we have to have these people back.
We do absolutely have to have these people back. If you guys can continue to travel to Pittsburgh either next year or the year after, that would be beyond awesome. I'm just saying that right now. And regardless, you're always awesome to talk to, and I regret we can't talk more often because life is what it is. We all have lots of stuff to deal with.
Well, I'd love to come back another time, maybe with something to read. And I will never turn down a chance to talk to y'all. So just, thank you for bringing us together for this one. And I'm super excited to chat with you all in a medium other than reading your books. So
Good deal.
Yep. Oh, Danny.
And that's our show. If you are horror adjacent in books, comics, film, streaming, and want to be on the Horror Words podcast, email drownedrat@horrorwords.com. Good night.